Hello, hello. Welcome to the Mother Days podcast. I am one of your hosts, Sarah Wright Olson.
And I'm Teresa Palmer.
And I am so excited to introduce all of you guys to Kimberly Shannon Murphy. Kimberly, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Okay, so Kimberly Shannon Murphy. Kimberly is a leading Hollywood stuntwoman who served as a double for numerous A-list actresses, including Cameron Diaz, by the way. You've been in like 130 something feature films and television shows, some of which are Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, Captain America, The Eternals, Hunger Games, Lone Ranger. Jeez, these are crazy. Euphoria, Big Little Lies, Westworld. What? It's like everything that we watch. And also you are a 2-time Screen Actors Guild Award winner for Best Stunt Ensemble. You've had numerous award nominations and also in 2018 started working as a stunt coordinator. What's up, badass? And if that's not enough, you added Taekwondo. I'm sorry, you're a black belt in Taekwondo, is that correct?
Yes.
Right. And you also do aerial work and
in my other life, but yes.
In your other life. Okay. And you're married and you have a daughter who is my son Wyatt's age, 9 years old. And one of the reasons why we wanted to have you on is because you just wrote a book called Glimmer. And we are so thrilled to have you and to talk to you and to listen to your story and to share this with all of our listeners. So, one of the ways that we got to you, thank God, because I'm sure you're just like all over the place right now. I see that you're doing every podcast, every interview, because of your book, Glimmer, is that my sister-in-law, Danny, and you and my husband have worked together for 10 years on NCIS Los Angeles.
Yes.
And Danny read your book and she was like, Sarah, you have to read this book. She was like, it is so powerful, such a book of healing and survival, and Kimberly is amazing. And so I feel like your audience and your platform would be like the perfect place for you guys to hold space for her and have this conversation. So, so we are so happy to do that today. And, for anybody out there who's experienced trauma, we're wanting to give you this trigger warning right now and just let you know that this subject matter is going to be intense and powerful, and just want everybody to know that before we get into it.
Yeah, Kimberly, I'm always so moved by people who are so willing to crack open and be vulnerable and candid and talk about the adversity that they have faced in their life. I'm married to one of those people, my husband, Mark Webber. He often talks about his past and his traumas and how they've manifested themselves in his life presently. And it's one of the things I love about him so much is he's so willing to be so raw, and it's really inspiring. And for you to have navigated all that you have and to just be so vulnerable to write it all out, to uplift other people going through really challenging and confronting times that so many people probably feel that they're stuck in a dark place and there's no hope. What propelled you to share your story in this way?
Well, I've been wanting to write a book for 20 years probably now, and started journaling 20 years ago and just writing things down and just things I needed to get out. And then I wasn't in the space then that I am now, and I wasn't healing back then like I am now. And also, I think having a child really changed everything for me, because I realized how much my trauma was going to affect her if I didn't really do the work and deal with it. And that just wasn't an option for me. And I wanted her to have a life that I never had. And I wanted her to feel all the things I never felt. And I wanted her to feel safe. And I wanted her to feel seen and heard and all of the things that I lacked as a child. And so she's a big part of why I did it. I just feel like when we become parents, that our life takes on a whole new meaning, as far as we have to own what we've been through in our life and really look at it so that we can show up the best way possible for our kids.
And what has the response been like? I can imagine that many other survivors have reached out to you to want to share their own personal stories. How does that feel to now be someone who represents like healing and growth, and now you get to create safe spaces for people all over the world to share their stories?
It feels really good. And that was part of my why as well, because I wanted to be able to reach people in such a way. I think that it's really easy. I shouldn't say really, nothing's really easy when you've had, as they call, capital T trauma, but it's easier when you have the resources, when you can, find a good therapist and you have things at your fingertips where you're able to, go to. And I think that there's a lot of people in this world that don't have that. And so I'm in writing this book, my hope was to be that for those people who don't have that, that can't afford a $300 an hour therapist, and so that they could feel seen and not alone. And, the statistics of childhood sexual abuse is, 90% of children that are abused is by either a family member or somebody that the family knows. And that's just such an insane number when you think about it. And I just really wanted to bring awareness to that, because I think we want to live in a society where we trust everybody, and we want that to be something that's realistic. And it just isn't, unfortunately. And I wanted to bring awareness to that for parents, because, we could all be really guilty of that. Oh, it's uncle, whoever, and not really think about who we're leaving our kids with.
It's so true. And so true the way that you're, that you describe that you feel safe because you're like, oh, it's a person who's in my family, or it's like a best friend I've had for 20 years. And, I've had people in my life who've experienced that kind of trauma really young. And it was absolutely like a best friend who was around all the time. For anybody who doesn't know about Glimmer, do you want to take us through a little bit of the story or the background of the book? I know it was structured really differently than like some books, your different parts that you have. And you have some amazing heroes in there who were champions for you as well. So do you want to talk a little bit about your story and your childhood and what led you to this place?
Yeah. So I was abused by my mother's father. And it started probably around 2 or 3 and stopped when he died when I was 11. And my mother had suffered sexual abuse at his hands as well. And she had repressed memories. And so she didn't remember anything until after he died as well. So we just lived in a really toxic family, and it was all created by him, who I'm sure he was abused at some point in his life as well. Not that that's any reason to turn around and do it to anybody else, but I believe that I'm sure things happened to him in his life. And it's really interesting because through this journey, I've been able to connect with so many amazing trauma doctors that have been such a good resource for me to just understand how something like this can happen, because I think that that's a really big piece to it too, is acknowledging that. And Dr. Gabor Mate, who's a famous trauma doctor, said to me on one of our first conversations, Kimberly, your first trauma was not actually your sexual abuse. Your first trauma was that you had no adult support in your life, because if you did, the abuse would have never happened in the first place. And that was something that I had never thought about really. And because you don't want to put blame on anybody besides the person that was the perpetrator. But in fact, it is the adults around you, and it is the people that weren't, obviously present either physically or emotionally or mentally in a place where they could take care of you in the way that you need to be taken care of. And that's why it was so important for me to write the story, because I want people to understand how important it is to deal with your trauma before you have kids, because if not, it bleeds out in different ways on our children and on our spouses or partners or whoever we're with. And it may not be in the same form of what happened to us, but it is in some form bleeding out. And that was just something that was really important for me with this book. And also, I feel like we wrote it I had a ghostwriter, which was an incredible help. And we wrote it in such a way that it's not triggering. I feel like we don't go into details of what happened, but still you get the gravity of the situation without us having to really, I didn't want the people that I wrote the book for to feel like, oh my God, I can't read this. It's too much. It's too overwhelming. I wanted it to be something where people who had been through something similar felt seen and heard and understood, and not like, oh gosh, I have to put this down. I can't read it, because then it defeats the whole purpose of why I did it in the first place.
That takes a certain, you're just so brave to put it out there. And to know that all right, taking this step is not just a therapeutic for yourself. It's therapeutic for all those people reading it. And I myself know at least 5 people that I'm sure your book would have the kind of ripple effects that you're hoping it will, helping to be a source of healing. I wanted to ask you, what was it like? Tell me about those steps to healing. Where did it start? How did it feel initially when you had to crack open and peel back the layers of that abuse and have to take a look at it again? How did that journey start? And then how does it feel now? Because I know someone very close to me who's so afraid to crack that part of her life open again because she's worried she'll get lost in the abyss. And so I want to hear about that.
So many people say the same thing. And it's really interesting. Another thing that Gabor and I have become really good friends, and I'm constantly like, Gabor, anytime I'm struggling or having a problem. And when I brought that up to him, because there are people in my family that feel that way and have chosen to deal with their trauma in a different way, which is not at all. He said to me, you already survived the worst part of it, which is so true, right? So our child self, the person who was abused, we already went through it. So it's not, even writing this book, it wasn't like I was reliving it. I never felt that way. I felt like every step that I took, and I just kind of doubled up on my therapy. I started doing a lot of psychedelic work, which was huge help for me. And I think just getting a real support system around you of people who understand the path that you're on and really support the path that you're on. And sometimes that means that we have to shed other people in our life that sort of fit into our life when we were broken, but don't fit into our life when we're putting ourselves back together. And to be okay with that, and to know that that's all part of the journey. I don't think the journey ever ends, to be honest. I still feel like I have days that are really hard. I still feel like I struggle a lot. I think it's naive to say that if you've been through something so massive that you're not going to, that just one day you wake up and you're like, I'm healed and everything's great. And I just don't think it works like that. And that's okay. I think some days you feel like, oh my gosh, I took 10 steps backwards. And then other times for months, you'll feel like you've grown so much. So it's just like anything. The path is not linear and it's not the same for everybody. And everybody's healing journey is different. And everyone finds different therapies in different ways that work for them. And it's not going to be the same for everybody. And I think it's really important to acknowledge that and not make people feel like, okay, if you don't do it this way, then that's not the right way. Because everyone has been dealt a different hand of cards, and we're all different people and different humans inside, and we all have to process things the way that we process them, and it's different for everybody, but it's worth it. I mean, it's definitely worth it, because like, to speak to what you're saying is, for your friend, it's going to affect her massively if she doesn't look at it in so many more ways than she even realizes. Because like I said, it just comes out in different ways. Whether your child says something and you have a reaction, I do a lot of IFS therapy, which is internal family systems.
Oh, wow.
They work with like parts of you. Dr. Richard Schwartz started it, and it's become a very famous therapy. And basically his belief is that when we have trauma in our childhood, we get stunted in that space. So if we're being abused or neglected or abandoned, or we're holding guilt or shame or whatever those feelings are, that we actually get stunted in that age. So when something may happen in our life where we feel abandoned or we have those feelings, we actually respond from like a 7-year-old space or an 8-year-old space.
Wow. Yeah.
And that's like when they say you're being triggered. So you're responding, and then you might step back and go, oh my gosh, like, where did that come from? Like, why did I have such a reaction? Well, it's because you have a wound that hasn't been healed, and you're literally 7. Your 7-year-old is responding to that, not your adult self. And I find that work to be really helpful, and they do it all over the world. There's like he has a ton of licensed therapists that do the work, and I find it to be really helpful.
That's amazing. Okay, so that's called IFS. Is that what you said? IFS. Yeah. Okay. Well, when you were talking a little bit about your book, you mentioned that, did you say that your mom remembered or didn't remember that it had happened until after your abuser died? Is that what you said?
Yeah, she had repressed memories, which is what they're called. And I think because she had been abused for so many years of her life, and he had such this, like, he had literally groomed her and had such this control over her, her brain she just disconnected. And she still does it to this day. Like, I can see when it happens to my mom, when she just like leaves her body and she's just not like there. And so it wasn't until he died, I believe, because she felt safer, that she was able to tap into that space and actually remember what had happened to her.
And you were at that time, how old were you?
She had her memories like a year before I did. So I was about 14, and I had my memories when I was about 15.
Oh my gosh.
Wow. So you also had repressed memory.
Yes.
Wow. That's crazy to think that. And what has that relationship been like with you and your mum processing this together, having the mutual perpetrator? Has that been challenging? Because obviously you're two individual people, you deal with things differently. Or has it been a source of comfort, being able to lean on each other?
No, it's been really challenging. And the thing that I will say about my mom is that she really listens, and she's done a lot of therapy, and she's done a lot of work on herself, and she really tries. And so, we've had our ups and downs, and we've been through a lot of pain through all of it. And in the beginning, it was kind of like I felt like she was sort of putting us in this space together. And I had to really, as I was healing and really going through this with the book, sort of say to her, Mom, like, we're not actually on this boat together, because even though you're a victim and I can see that and I understand that in my head, you were still my mother who didn't protect me. So I love my mother. I have a relationship with my mother. I don't forgive my parents for what happened to me, but especially with my mother, I have compassion for her in my heart, and I have love for her because of what she's been through, and we're able to have the hard conversations, and she is able to have them with me, which means a lot to me. She doesn't like close the door and pretend like it doesn't exist. She's very open to having them, even though I know they're really difficult for her. And so it's been an ever growing sort of process. It's like I went through my childhood mothering my mom, and now we're sort of having to go back and reverse that, which takes a lot of work.
That's a really interesting dynamic shift. I can relate only in a small way of my mum has mental health issues, and it was just the two of us. And she's like got this beautiful innocence and childlike quality. So a lot of the time I was like mothering the mother. That was a part of, one of my wounds. But sometimes like there's so much love there that you have for your parents that I think when you start the process of therapy, it gets really complicated to like hold the space for both things. So it's amazing that you've been able to walk that path, being able to see that she herself was a victim, but also the fact that she had an innate responsibility to you and to raise you and to keep you safe. I wanted to shift gears into talking about your partner. How has he shown up for you, and what does that look like? Like, how can you be a supportive and encouraging and understanding partner when you yourself haven't been through these things? Like, what would you say to people out there who have a spouse, have a partner who are deep in their healing journey?
I think it depends on the partner. My husband had a really normal life. So I find it amazing that I was even able to really actually accept him in my life when I was, because I wasn't in the best place when we met. So the fact that he sort of stuck it out with me was a big deal. And so we've done therapy together, and I think communication is key. I will have moments where I still have memories and I'm still, going through a lot. Still, I've realized that it's actually never probably going to end. It's gotten better, but that we have to communicate on what I need. Sometimes I need him to just leave me alone, and I need to be in my own space by myself, and I don't want to be touched or hugged or consoled or anything. And sometimes it's the opposite. And so we've gotten good where he'll just say to me, do you want me to leave the room? Do you want me to, take Capri out? Do you need me here? Do you want a hug? Like, just being able to have that communication. And because sometimes when you're in that space, like you don't want to be touched, or you don't want to be, that's like hard for me sometimes. So we've done a lot of work around just being able to talk to each other. And usually I just say one, like, please leave me alone, or, I actually need you. But he's been I wouldn't have been able to do this book without him. He's been behind me 100%, which couldn't have been easy, because I am very candid with, not only what happened to me as a child, but then the book takes you through my 20s and all of the really, bad decisions we make in our 20s, but I made worse decisions because of my past. And he was always just really accepting of me needing to tell my story and supportive of that. There's just so much power in the truth. And I grew up in a very secretive household where we didn't speak the truth. And that was always very confusing to me, because I think part of me was just born that way, where I was just like, okay, I just want the truth. I just always want the truth. And that's how I run this house with my daughter. Like, everything is we speak the truth, we tell the truth. And I just wasn't brought up that way. And so it's really important to me to where I probably like overly tell the truth. He's like, Kim, like she's 9, Kim. I'm like, oh yeah, right. Okay. Yeah.
Okay. So you met your husband, Casey. You guys fell in love. And then can you tell me about like did you always know that you wanted to be a mom? Did it at some point when the two of you were together, were you like, this is what we want to have a kid together? Like, was that hard? I mean, with everything that you went through, I'm sure, I think that's a silly question, but tell us a little bit about, what brought you to that journey. And then how was it being pregnant and having your baby and all of those things?
Well, because I'm a stunt woman, it was one of those things where I wasn't sure that I wanted to have kids. I was just working so much that I really didn't have time to think about it, which is probably part of my like trauma. Just really just like stay busy so you don't have to actually think about what you're feeling. And he has a daughter. So I have a stepdaughter who's older. And when we got married, we were both sort of like, we were kind of indifferent about the whole thing. And then I was working on a film, and one of the stunt women who was working, she was older stunt woman, mom of 4. And she just turned to me and said, when are you going to start having kids? And I was like, I don't know. I don't know if I'm going to. And she's like, you better start now because it could take you 2 years. And I came home that night and literally said to Casey, I think we should just try. And he said, okay. And he said, but if it doesn't work naturally, like, I don't want to go through all the IVF. Like, if it's meant to be, it will be. And we were both kind of on the same page with that. And literally I got pregnant that night.
Oh my gosh. So obviously
you had a soul knocking at the door. That was just
going to say the same thing. She was just like there. And you know what? She probably used the stunt woman friend of yours as like a conduit to come in and be like, please pass on this message right now.
She's like, I know how to get in here. I'm going to use
God. It was crazy because I was on the movie. When I found out I was pregnant, I was still on the same film. And I had done, oh my God, I did like 50 ratchets I had no idea. I was pregnant. And randomly, for some reason, I just felt like I should take a pregnancy test. I don't even know why I even thought I should. I wasn't even late. Anyway, said I was pregnant. And then I had bought, I'm like a bulk buyer. So I bought like a bunch, I had like a bunch of pregnancy tests and I just kept taking them because I'm like, this can't
There's no way.
That's us, by the way. We so many.
Yeah, I always take so many.
And then I was like, obviously I'm pregnant because I can't stop peeing. So,
oh my God.
So I quit the job and then that was that.
For anyone who doesn't know what a ratchet is, can you tell us what 50 ratchets, what is that?
Yeah, I was like, are they shots? Are they? Were you like taking 50 shots? I was like, wait, is it some move?
No, she was probably like jumping through some fire hoop or something. What was it?
It's when you see like an explosion in a movie and someone get yanked out of frame.
That's
God.
Oh, that's a ratchet.
Yeah.
Oh,
jeez.
That's wild. Well, thank God there's such tiny itty bitty little like seeds of a thing inside at that time that she probably would have just been like, whatevs. Oh my God.
She was probably holding on for dear life in there, being like, this was my moment.
Like the poppy seed being like, ooh. It's a bit bumpy in here.
I was at the gynecologist at my and took the blood test and I was like, no, but I did like a lot of crazy things. And he's like, she's fine. We didn't know it was a girl at the time. The baby's fine. And I said, no, can I just show you the video? Because I feel like you need to really like here. And so he watched, he's like, oh my God. And he's like, no, if something was going to happen, it would have already happened. And so, yeah.
So that was like a huge surprise. So did you go tell Casey right away or did you?
He like came home. I was still in the bathroom, like taking my tests. And he said, like screamed across the house. He's like, let's go for a motorcycle ride. Like, let's get on the dirt bikes. And I'm like, I came out with like all these tests in my hand. I was like,
I can't.
Oh my God.
Okay, so I wanted to ask you a question about your daughter, Capri.
Mhm.
So have you been open with her about any of your experiences? I know you say that you are open, you like telling the truth. And have you, in a roundabout way, said anything? Obviously, probably haven't got into any sort of details, but does she know that something happened to her mum in her childhood that was hard, but doesn't know the specifics? Like, what's your plan with that, having that conversation?
She does know, because when I was she doesn't know the specifics. But because I've had to sort of go, like, as they call it, no contact with a lot of my family, because they were not supportive of the book. And so I needed to take some space. And because of that, that was confusing because she has cousins, and that, unfortunately affected her, and she was starting to be left out of things. And that was really difficult for her. So basically because of how I raised her, she kept saying to me, Mommy, well, first of all, obviously she sees me writing the book, Mommy, I want to know what the book's about. I want to read the book. And I said, well, Capri, when you're older, you can absolutely read it. But if you have any questions, Mommy will answer them for you. And she said, obviously, what's the book about? Why am I not seeing my cousins anymore? All these questions. So Casey was with me at the time. And, I get really choked up with her with this, because it's just obviously hard, and it makes me really sad that she has to even feel any of it. And he said to her, you know how Mommy and Daddy's number one job is to protect you? And she said, yes. And he said, well, Mommy wasn't protected when she was a kid. And so she got hurt. And so she said, who hurt you? And I said, she calls my mom Mina. And I said, Mina's dad hurt Mommy. And she just said, did he hurt you with his hands, or did he hurt your heart? And I just said both. And she just hugged me. And it was like a beautiful moment, honestly, of just again, how easy it is to tell the truth, as long as you're doing it, obviously, in the way that they can sort of wrap their little brains around it, because obviously they can't understand like the velocity of it. And she just hugged me and she said, Mommy, I'm so sorry that happened to you. And that was it. And we just like went to dinner, and so she'll ask questions now. Like last night when I was putting her to bed, she'll ask me some, she'll like bring some things up and ask some things, but I try to be as honest as I can without being jarring to her, because it is really tricky. Yeah. And Casey's really good about like pulling me back, because, I could, like I said, could be a little bit, too honest to where she can't. I want her to be able to take it in and hear it. And then it opens the conversation to have with her of, okay, like I grew up in a generation where it was, what the adults say go, and we don't question authority, and we listen to what, and so it opens the conversation where I say to her, look, Capri, people have to earn your trust. Just because they're your teacher, or they're somebody that, your coach, or anybody who you're supposed to listen to, that doesn't mean that you just go in blindly trusting everybody. Like people have to earn your trust. People have to earn your love, and you have to have boundaries, and you have to take care of yourself. And when I talk to her about her body, we use correct body, like we use the correct terms for our body, which I think is really important, because when I was young, it was, little cutesy names. And then I feel like that can be confusing, because when you're teaching them that nobody touches you here, and and there's a reason, and this is your, this is your space. And all of those conversations that were never had with me, I'm able to have with her. And I think that part of it is because of this, and part of it's because I have been so open, and doing this has brought up things that probably would have never been brought up.
There's this amazing woman, Patty Fitzgerald, and I don't know. Do you know who she is? She's she was a social worker who worked in that field for like so many years, and then she started saying instead she was going to go and talk to parents about how to teach their children to be the boss of their own body. And to have the language to say, I'm the boss of my body. No one touches my, everything that you just said, where it's like you're using all the correct language for your body parts. She also calls it like your bathing suit parts, but no one touches those except for me. Mommy and daddy can help you, if when you're 2 to go to the bathroom, but it's, you have to be the one who's in charge of your own body. And so anyway, she goes around and she talks to schools and she talks to kids and she talks to parents, and she came to our preschool, and I remember feeling very like jarred, listening to everything at first, and all the stories, but I walked away from that going, okay, like it was really hard to sit and have this conversation and to listen and to go, wow, this is something that really could happen to your child if you're not protecting your kid, because it's you just, sometimes we just don't see things because we grew up, generational trauma. We grew up in a way where, in my family, like, I was a pastor's kid. So I had to be kind to everyone, and everyone wanted to hug you, and you had to hug back, and you had to give kisses and like all those things. And, looking back at all of that, I was like, that was so taken advantage of as a child. And it felt, not great to me all the time. And so I never wanted my kids to feel that way, and I never wanted them to feel forced. So anyway, I'm just really glad that you talked about that and how you communicate with your daughter about it, because I found that language so powerful to, make sure that you're communicating really clearly with your kid about their body and how they are the ones who are in charge of their body.
Yes, exactly. And she even the other day said something to me, and, Mommy, I think there's there was something going on that she was feeling. And I said, did you just want to tell Mommy, or do you want Mommy to look at it? I always
that's so
as
great.
her mother, like ask her
Asking
permission. Like, do you want me to look, or did you just want to let me know? And then and then she's like, no, I want you to look. So I want her, even from her own mother, to know that I'm asking her permission, and that I'm her mom, and it's still not my right to just be like, let me see that, and
totally.
She feels safe and she feels protected, and she feels like she gets to make the choice of whether or not she wants to show me or not show me, and that's okay if she doesn't want to show me, even though I'm her mother.
Of course. And that, I find that it shifts as well. Like you see your children kind of, at least in my experience, my kids were so like open and running around naked all the time. And then like the awareness starts to like creep in of like, oh, actually like I want to be a little bit more private here. And, even my 6-year-old son, it's happened a bit earlier for him. Like he changes like in a room somewhere, or like even away from Mark, away from I, like he goes away to do his, and that's what he feels comfortable with. And then I have my daughter who's just like, free naked in front of everyone. And and so it's really interesting. I wanted to ask you a little bit about that specifically. I guess it's like 2 parts to the question. Is like, I want to, if my kids are like, I want to have a sleepover and I want to like stay at my friend's house. And I think there's like a whole like wave of parents who are really wobbly about the idea of having like childhood sleepovers, because we get afraid that, of these stories where like you think the parents well, but I also at the same time like don't want to let my own sort of fear get in the way of like the childhood experience of having a sleepover. So sometimes I'm just in this place of like floating and not fully knowing, do I be the parent that's like no sleepovers or not? Like how do you navigate that? And have you noticed in your own relationship with your daughter that you are more protective in terms of her having like sleepaways away from the house?
She has not done one yet. Like with a grandparent, like with my mom, she has. My mom lives close to us. But yeah, I think that that's really hard. And it's going to take me a minute I have one other mom friend who I'm close with, who I trust, but still, I don't know who else is at the house, or I don't know who else goes. So I don't see myself allowing her to do sleepovers for a few more years. And when she was really little, like before she had a voice, everything was very hard for me. Before she could express herself to me, I was just in constant terror that something was happening or something would happen that she couldn't vocalize to me. So now I'm in a much better space just with myself, that she can have a conversation with me and talk to me. And she hasn't asked to do a sleepover, so I have not been presented with that yet. Or she'll say something. She had said something this year, like, "Oh, so-and-so is going to have everyone sleep over." And I said, "Well, Capri, you still sleep with mom. So yeah, because when my husband's gone, she sleeps in my bed with me. And when he's home, she sleeps in her own bed." And she's like, "Oh yeah, you're right.
I slept with my mom until I was 13.
Yeah. I think it's great.
I just want to sleep with you.
I'm all about it. I mean, she's not always going to want to do it. So I'm embracing it. And, but that is definitely a tricky one, because even if you trust the parent, like what uncle's coming over, or who's stopping by, and who's, unfortunately, the thing about pedophiles, like people that abuse children, is that they put themselves around children. I mean, that's what they do.
Yeah. And I think we should feel empowered to have uncomfortable conversations. And Sarah, I think you've talked about this before on the podcast, like, living in America, like having the conversation like, "Hey, do you guys have guns in the house anywhere?" Like just having those conversations and not worried about coming across like overbearing, or like you're not, it's sort of a confronting conversation to have. And I wonder if it's similar with the sleepovers, like, "Hey, I just am checking in. Like, we don't usually do sleepovers. I just want to know like who's going to be at the house, like who's going to be there. Is anyone going to be visiting?" And having those more uncomfortable conversations. I'm so used to being like such a like people pleaser and just like really cruisy, really easy. My husband was like giving me shit about this yesterday. Like, even like with people in my life, in my working life, I'm always just like, "Oh, whatever you want. No, seriously, like it's up to you." Like I sometimes feel like so much more focused on like making them feel okay. And as a parent, like that's not always the best way. You have to like, for me, I'm like, oh my God, I've got to like be brave to have uncomfortable conversations sometimes. And sometimes the answer is going to be no, you're not having the sleepover at so-and-so's house. So yeah, I think that's all that kind of tricky area that we have to navigate as parents, like making the right decisions, because God forbid you make the wrong decision and it affects your child for the rest of their life.
Yeah. And that's the thing. It takes 1 second to change everything. And that's the scariest part about it. I think that parents are starting to have those more difficult conversations. And so that's why these conversations are so important, because it makes parents more aware. And I think that if you're not having those conversations, then those are not the parents you want your kids to sleep over anyway. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like if they're just like, "Yeah, you can sleep over, just go," and there's no communication happening, that's like a red flag to me.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
I mean, also, I think there's a language too that you have with your kids where, like Esme, very early on, she's my middle daughter. And very early on, we were telling Esme, because you could tell that she had like big feelings about certain people. And so did Wyatt, actually. But I think it was actually from Patty Fitzgerald, but she talks about thumbs up and thumbs down people.
Mm-hmm.
So who gives you the thumbs up feeling and who gives you a thumbs down feeling? And so it was like a great way when my kids were like 3 years old to be able to communicate. If someone gave them a thumbs down feeling, you know, if you're taking them to like a daycare or preschool, or they're going over for a play date and someone has a nanny, or there's someone else at the house, like if your kid is able to clearly be like, I'm having a thumbs down feeling about this, like your kid has a great radar, you know? Right. And to be able to have the language to say, there's been maybe 3 times in our experience with one of our kids where they've said, I'm not having a good feeling about this person and I don't want to stay. Yeah. And then I'm like, okay, great. And I didn't necessarily have that feeling. And so my kid was able to express to me, because we talked about people who give you thumbs up feelings, people who give you thumbs downs, and what that means, and like defining that and making it, you know, without going into crazy details, but just, you know, when you have something in your gut and you can feel something, and then, you know, having a 3-year-old being able to express that and say that to you, like I could almost cry thinking about the one time that my son was like, I have a thumbs down feeling, I want to go. And I was like, okay, you know, and like we left, but I left there just being like, whoa, like what, I wonder what that was. And okay, I'm glad we left. But I'm only saying this to say that like, in all of that conversation, you know, whether you decide to have your kid do a sleepover or not do a sleepover, if you're going to have those uncomfortable conversations, also arming your children with like the language and the communication to be able to come to you and say like, I don't know, I'm not feeling it. Like, I don't want to stay here, you know, and giving them an out.
Right. And like you were saying before about having to hug everybody, that was such a huge thing back then, where it's like, we hug everyone. Huge. I tell Capri, if she wants to hug you, she's going to hug you. And we never say that ever. And we do have a friend of ours who I adore, and he'll come over, and with his son, he's always like, give Kim a hug. And I'm like, no, he doesn't have to give me a hug. Like if he wants to give me a hug, he'll come up and give me a hug. I don't want a child to ever feel that, because it's such you can see that it makes them uncomfortable.
Yes, so absolutely you can.
Because you're putting them on the spot. They may not know this person really well. And you're like, well, it's Uncle John. So you have to, you know, hug Uncle John or give him, and you know, to just give our children the space to actually listen to their feelings and their intuition and follow it. And actually, as a parent, to honor them and to honor that their feeling actually matters is massive, because it gives them such a, like it's gonna bring their self-respect to such a huge level as they get older.
Yeah. And their confidence and being able to like say, because I never felt like, oh, you know, I mean, I definitely felt empowered as a kid, but I also felt like I had to stay within a very tight, you know, line of boundary of like, you have to look a certain way, present yourself a certain way, act a certain way, like you're in this very religious space, and everyone kind to everybody, like loving and accepting, which is a wonderful thing. And
but exhausting,
but also there's some people that you don't have to be like that with. Like if someone's giving you a thumbs down feeling, you don't have to go out of your way to be kind and loving and accepting to that person and go up and hug them and like let them give you a hug. Like it shouldn't be the way that it is. And I'm glad that these conversations are happening. And I think since COVID too, which everybody knows I was the COVID crazy lady. I was the one walking around with goggles and like the big old mask and for way too long, like way longer than anyone else. I got a massage and I was wearing children's like swimming goggles and a mask. And I swear, like way too long. So now I sort of feel like I've crossed a line of crazy, that having those uncomfortable conversations to be like, yeah, you know, I've never really let someone take my kid home from school to their house and I remember having this conversation one year where I was like, I really appreciate the offer of offering to take my child home and have a play date. But instead I'll meet you there. I'll come to the house. We'll have a play date and I'll hang around or I'll go walk the neighborhood. But the reason is that because I need to see the space and I need to I need to make sure my son's comfortable and, whatever it is.
Yeah, totally.
And I just am as clear as day as I can be about that. And there's a reason for it,
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's good to do that and to have those conversations because exactly what you're saying, you want your kids to feel safe. You also want them to feel like you've got their back too.
Yeah,
totally.
Yeah. And that their feelings matter. And the way I put it with Capri is I talk to her about, I say, how we all have this light inside of us. Mm-hmm. And when you're around the right people, you feel like your light shines brighter, like you're laughing or you're happy. And then you'll be around somebody that dims your light. Yes. So we talk a lot about that. And I say, you want to surround yourself with the people that make your light brighter always, because, and that just goes across the board in life. And then, it brings you into talking to them about boundaries, which is a word that I didn't learn till I was in my 30s. So it's just, it's really great. I feel like that we're in this space with our children now. And by the way, we don't need to feel guilty or feel anything, but just that we're being a mother, and about asking questions or feeling like, oh, I don't want to say that because this one who cares? What anybody thinks. You're the one that had the child. They're your kid, and you're protecting them. And that's all that matters,
Kimberly, thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing this profound story. It's just so remarkable to think that you're willing to be so open, and it's a painful thing to have to unpack, but you are changing lives everywhere. So thank you so much for your willingness to show up in that way. Could you please tell our listeners where can they find your book?
Yes. It's called Glimmer and it's on Amazon, which is the easiest thing for everyone to do. So I feel like that, you can get it in Barnes and Nobles too, but Amazon's done. And then it's in your mailbox. So
when you order your toothpaste, also order or whatever, whatever it is, click on Glimmer as well and put it in a bulk package.
And I do the only social media I really do is Instagram. And I answer everybody's, when people write me that they read the book and they talk, I make a big effort to answer and communicate back because it means a lot to me. Everyone's a stranger who's been writing me, but it means a lot to me. And I think it means a lot to them to feel like they're being, when they reach out, that they're actually being heard and
responded to.
Yes, exactly. So,
and you can find Kimberly on Instagram at Kimberly Shannon Murphy Stunts.
Really short.
Thank you. Yeah, really super short one. And I was like, okay, if you just sort of put that in the search, it'll come up and it's got a blue tick and you'll know it's her.
I went on to your Instagram and I saw, there were so many amazing things on there, but I was also listening to, which we didn't really get to in this talk today, but your letter from your Aunt Pat, who it was just so powerful. And so you guys should go on to Kimberly's Instagram and listen to that as well. It's an excerpt from the book, right?
Yes,
Amazing.
Yes. It's a letter that she wrote the family and it's an excerpt in the book. And it's basically her telling us that if we don't break our generational trauma, that we're going to just continue it and it's going to be passed on to our children. And she's passed away a few years now, but I feel like I'm following out her, what she really wanted for our family. So
Oh, that's amazing.
Amazing.
Yeah. That's incredible. Thank you so much for sharing. Thank you so much for being
so
here.
much for your time.
I can't wait to tell Danny that I had you on here.
Yes.
You guys have been listening to the Mother Days podcast. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts, and go get Glimmer. Thank you, Kimberly.
Thank
So
you.
happy to have you. And bye, daisies.